Welcome to this week's episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this week's episode, we look into the International Criminal Court and a filing that nobody saw coming. Let's get started. It is a very, very dark day in the International Criminal Court. For many weeks and months, I've spoken about the completely BS International Criminal Court and the way that they function as an arm to attack Israel. And unfortunately, this week, we got some news out of the International Criminal Court. And I hate to say that they are looking into maybe making more prosecutions. This whole issue in Gaza is getting apparently too much for the international community, and so the International Criminal Court is going to have to look into this matter and finally bring charges against the people who are responsible. I spoke about in an old episode, International Criminal Court, the modern-day Dreyfus trial, about the charges that have already been laid against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. If you want to look back at that episode, it's Season 3, Episode 130. But unfortunately, I guess our luck ran out because the International Criminal Court, as much as it meant nothing, as much as those charges are completely baseless, we are seeing some serious allegations that are happening in Gaza. And I guess we can't really hide it anymore. The charges stem from complaints about, apparently and allegedly, torturing and executing Palestinian civilians, using Gazans as human shields, stealing and diverting aid and not giving it to the people of Gaza, ensuring that nobody can speak out against the violence and silencing those who do. All of these generally categorized as war crimes and crimes against humanity. The filing at the International Criminal Court claims that this is systemic. It is directed against Gazan civilians who are innocent for all intents and purposes. This filing includes public reporting of killing and torturing people, coercion, intimidation of civilians, misuse of civilian infrastructure, and endangerment of civilian lives. I will be very honest with you. It is very difficult to read some of these allegations and support the people who are doing it. Maybe everything I've ever done in this podcast is for nothing. Well, that would be true if this were talking about Israel, because it's not. These allegations were made by a Gazan person against, guess who? Hamas. The people who actually are doing all of these things. The stuff we've talked about for years, the stuff that everybody knew, including the international community, and yet nobody did anything about it. But guess what? This week, a Gazan man has come forward and has asked the International Criminal Court to formally investigate Hamas as people who committed war crimes against their own people. I know this seems pretty crazy. The reality is everybody knew that this was happening. Why only now are we getting the International Criminal Court to look into this? Shouldn't they have looked into this before? It's not like this has been a secret. But the International Criminal Court, if you listen to any of our old podcasts, you know, is completely and utterly biased and corrupt. Like the prosecutor who laid charges in order to get himself out of a sexual assault case where he didn't charge any Hamas leaders, except for one who he already knew was dead. Other than that, everybody got off scot-free. I actually recently mentioned that on one of our podcasts, where we talked about the fact that the ICC could have and should have charged all of the Hamas leadership for all of these crimes, and yet apparently didn't know about it, didn't care about it, or would prefer to pretend that only Israel's the problem. But now, maybe, the International Criminal Court cannot hide from the reality, because now it's the Gazan people bringing this to light and demanding charges against their leadership, their supposed government. According to the Jerusalem Post, a 40-page article demands that 14 named Hamas leaders be investigated for crimes committed against the Palestinian people, with an eye towards the issuance of warrants for their arrest. The Palestinian civilian from Gaza, who lost his wife, children, and other family members in the Gaza war, demonstrates in his filing that if Hamas had not committed these war crimes and other war crimes against the Gazan people, his family would still be alive, along with many other Gazans. According to the Jerusalem Post, the person who's making this claim says that he can prove that the following war crimes took place: utilizing the presence of civilians or other protected persons as human shields. We already knew that. Attacking civilians. We kind of knew that too. Intentionally directing attacks against civilian objects, willfully causing great suffering to those people, and destruction and appropriation of people's property. Not to mention excessive incidental death, injury, or damage by attacking protected objects. And last but not least, which we've talked about on this podcast before, using, conscripting, or enlisting children into their army. The allegations continue with things like crimes against humanity, murder, extermination, torture, and persecution of their own people. In the article, it references a quote that says, "To this day, the ICC's Office of the Prosecutor has not investigated, let alone sought warrants for crimes cynically committed by Hamas and its accomplices against the Gazan people during this war." So, despite what you hear online and on the television and all of these news reports, it's not Israel that's the problem. Clearly, according to this Gazan man, he is suggesting and he believes that he could prove that Hamas is the main problem here. They are doing the war crimes. They need to be prosecuted, not Netanyahu and not Yoav Gallant. I'm not sure how many of my listeners fell for that little ploy and actually believed this was something coming out against Israel. I wouldn't really even blame you, because it is such a crazy idea to think that the ICC would actually lay charges or investigate the Hamas leaders is kind of crazy. We never thought it would happen. But to be fair, this doesn't actually mean it's going to happen. We will have to see. What is happening right now is under a very unique article of the International Criminal Court. Article 15 says that a regular person, a witness, a victim, can come forward to the prosecution in order to open a case. It doesn't necessarily have to be started by the prosecutor or have any type of formal opening in the United Nations or even have a state bring it. A sole person who is a victim of this crime can bring it to a prosecutor who will then be forced to investigate. But will the International Court investigate? That's the question. We saw originally in the ICC case against the Israelis that the International Criminal Court, or at least their prosecutor, didn't even bother to investigate then. He just laid charges to get himself out of a sexual assault case, which didn't end up working and he ended up resigning. But the funny part is, if they didn't even bother to investigate that, do we really think they're going to care to investigate the situation in Gaza? The prosecutor who brought the case against Israel, who, by the way, since our last broadcast about this, was actually outed for receiving support from Qatar, a "don't worry, we got your back" kind of situation. But nonetheless, not surprisingly, he didn't charge anybody from Hamas, except for someone who was already dead. He could have easily, if he cared, looked into the way that Hamas started this conflict, or how Hamas has been dealing with this war. If you want to go back and listen, Season 5, Episode 191, Hashtags, Headlines, and War Crimes, I go into more detail about how many times Hamas has been caught committing war crimes, and how the international world and the NGOs know all about it. They're literally not even trying to hide it. But why the International Criminal Court chooses not to lay any charges or even investigate is something that you can decide. Why do you believe that they purposely and actively go against investigating the harm to the people that they pretend to care about? The poor Gazan people, the UN's ultimate victim, but apparently not enough to lay charges against the people who are actually harming them. So maybe, if we're lucky, we will actually see a prosecution against 14 Hamas leaders. Well, ironically, only 13 now because we took out another one this past week, so he's now gone. But nonetheless, these 14 people that are listed in this criminal complaint to the International Criminal Court lists all of the leadership, political and military, of Hamas. People like Khaled Mashal, who's still alive and living in Qatar. These people have never been brought to justice for their crimes against the Israelis or the crimes against the Gazans. And maybe it's about time they do. But if I could be honest, I don't think I'm going to hold my breath. Maybe it's cynicism. Maybe I'm a pessimist. Maybe I just know the UN too well. And the UN and the International Criminal Court are bought and paid for. As I said before, the leader of the last prosecution was paid for by Qatar. Don't worry, we got your back. So do I expect them to actually care about the Gazan people, or just continue to toe the line that Israel's the problem here? This is the ultimate form of hypocrisy. We now have a Gazan person going to the International Criminal Court, laying out what Hamas has been doing for the last number of years, demanding some justice, and the world, who pretends to care about them and pretends to care about human rights and justice, says, nah, not interested. So it's more likely they're probably going to bury this, pretend there's no evidence, or even worse, mark my words, they'll probably blame Israel for not letting their investigators into Gaza to go investigate. There's not enough evidence through social media posts, through NGOs who've now recently come out about it, and even from the Gazan people themselves. It really is truly amazing. Whenever the UN wants to find information about how bad Israel is, they always seem to find it. They always seem to have quotes. They always have pictures and videos of the supposed crimes, which usually aren't real or taken out of context. But somehow we can't be expected to actually do any research when it comes to Hamas's crimes. Like the videos we've all seen of them lining up people who are known to be quote unquote collaborators and murdering them in the streets. We can't use that as evidence, right? But on the other hand, when you have a video of a child who looks very, very sick and very small with no context whatsoever, clearly Israel's starving him, right? That's enough to go and write a report and a criminal warrant for someone's arrest for starving children. Interestingly, many of you people know the name Francesca Albanese. This is the UN rapporteur for the Palestinian people. Supposedly, her job is to watch out and take care of the Palestinian Arabs all over the West Bank, Gaza, and she's very vocal in her anti-Israel stance. Like, for example, when the ICC charged the Israelis, she was all over it in support. She has made many statements, like, for example, killing the members of a group, causing serious bodily harm or mental harm, and deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring their destruction is awful. And it's reasonable grounds to charge Israel with war crimes. Yet, ironically, when a man in Gaza brings forward the same type of claims, against Hamas this time, no statement. It's been literal crickets. Why is she not concerned for the Gazan people's lives? Isn't that her job as the special rapporteur for the people of Gaza and the Palestinian Arabs? Shouldn't she care about their human lives? But I guess only when it goes against Israel. If anybody needed any more evidence for her bias and her anti-Israel stance, and literally not caring about the Gazan people, there's your proof. She should be at the front of the line demanding ICC investigations into all of these terrible crimes. As she falsely claimed about Israel, Hamas, apparently, killing members of the group? Check. Causing serious bodily harm or mental harm? Check. And deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring someone's destruction? Sounds like Hamas to me. Check. For some reason, not worth tweeting about, not worth even looking into. Apparently, when it was Israel doing these things, according to her, it counts as war crimes. But when Hamas does it, guess it's not. Pretty sad for the person who's in charge of making sure that the Palestinian Arabs are doing okay, right? It is utterly insane that we even have to have this discussion. Like there's any question. Everybody knew what Hamas was up to. This is not a surprise, but everyone's been ignoring it. So will the ICC continue to ignore it? Will the media continue to ignore it? We'll see. For anybody who's listened to this podcast for some time now, you know that I often will tell you that whenever something comes out bad against Hamas, the Palestinian Arabs, anything going on that side of the border, immediately you will find the anti-Israel side flip it around, change it, and try and manipulate the story to make the Israelis the people who did the bad thing. As an example, when it came out pretty clearly in the media from witness testimony, from survivor testimony that Hamas had committed sexual assault on October 7th, within days, the anti-Israel media came out with these stories of how the IDF was actually doing that to people in Gaza in order to sort of suggest that, yeah, both sides do it. So you don't have to hate on Hamas for doing it. When the hostages came out of Gaza and we saw them malnourished, starving to death, mistreated, apparently the next day in the media, we saw a bunch of stories about the poor people getting out of Israeli prisons with broken arms who had been abused so badly, which then turned out to be a complete lie because the boy wearing the 2 arm casts was seen on video being released with no casts on his arms and signing a paper for his release. Clearly his arms worked just fine the day before. But this is a strategy that they use. Whenever they are caught doing something wrong, the anti-Israel media will immediately flip the story to try and suggest that it's a both sides issue. You can still support us when you're the Western useful idiots because both sides do it. Or, yeah, sure, we do it sometimes, but they do it worse than us. They have more power, they're stronger, so somehow that makes it worse than when our people do it. We can't be held responsible when we sexually assault people. We're poor, occupied, colonized people or whatever. So, funny enough, while I was preparing for this podcast, I actually saw something published a couple of hours ago in the Jerusalem Post. So this would have been a couple days after the announcement of this Gazan man bringing charges to the ICC. And guess what? According to Haaretz, for anybody who knows this podcast, you know Haaretz is the key manipulator of facts in order to present anti-Israel information. Haaretz is first publishing that The Hague, the ICC, is quietly seeking arrest warrants for several Israeli officials. According to the Haaretz report, it cites diplomatic sources that claims that the warrants will target 3 Israeli politicians and 2 IDF officials. However, the ICC spokesperson said that this isn't true, denies completely the issuance of any new arrest warrants in this issue. It really must be an incredible coincidence that the day that a Gazan comes forward asking to charge the leadership of Hamas with war crimes, Haaretz publishes that a number of Israeli leaders are going to be charged with war crimes. That really is one hell of a coincidence. Like clockwork, when a Gazan comes forward to talk about the war crimes that he has experienced, what does Haaretz do? They publish a completely fake, made-up article suggesting, well, actually, the ICC is charging Israelis with war crimes, even though that's not true. Just to muddy the waters, to confuse everybody, to make it seem like it's both sides. It really is unbelievable how hard Haaretz and other left-wing groups in Israel are working to cover up this issue. The same exact issue we talked about in Season 5, Episode 200, the revolution will be sexualized. The fact that all of these groups are ignoring the issues in Gaza, the people they pretend to care about, because as long as it's not being blamed on Jews and on Israel, they don't care to report about it. Or they'll try and spin it in order to make it seem like it's Israel that's really the problem here. In the end, I don't know what's going to happen with this ICC case. To be fair, I assume it'll just disappear. Everyone will get to continue to believe that the poor Gazans are not being harmed by their own people, their own leadership, their own government, the one who some of the world still wants in power in Gaza. And instead, they're just going to blame Israel for it, continuously blaming Israel and the Jews for everything that's going wrong. They'll sweep this under the rug. They'll continue to blame Israel, and that will be the status quo. And like we said in some of our old podcasts, the only people who are really being harmed here are the people of Gaza, the people that these groups pretend to care about, but clearly don't. Israel, in the end, will be just fine. Their previous ICC charges are probably going to get thrown out. They mean essentially nothing. If you listen to our old podcast, you'll hear that. But the International Criminal Court is probably not even going to pretend to look into the leadership of Hamas, the people who are actively oppressing, killing, mistreating, stealing from their own people. But I really can't say that I'm surprised. When we see this exact same situation happening in Iran, with the poor Persian people and Iranian people living under an oppressive government who steals their money, who kills their people, who abuses their women, the world stays silent because they don't care. Because, as they always say, no Jews, no news. But maybe we have some hope. maybe somehow some ICC prosecutor actually cares enough to investigate these crimes and bring these people to justice. I don't have much hope. One of the main issues here is even if they are charged by some miracle, how are you going to bring them to justice? Unless it's Israel who brings them to justice by bringing them to The Hague, to the International Criminal Court, I can't see anything happening. They will continue to live in Qatar or Turkey, both of which, by the way, are not signatories to the Rome Convention, and therefore they do not recognize the International Criminal Court. They do not have to bring a person from their country to the International Criminal Court. So the Hamas leadership, in theory, could be found guilty even, and there will be essentially no charges because we can't bring them to justice. So pretty much like all United Nations elements, it's pretty much useless. It's really a whole bunch of talk. But one thing that you can say about this entire situation is that these ICC charges were definitely not something that any of these NGOs, the UN, or any of their friends ever saw coming. They never thought a Gazan person would actually be willing to speak out against their oppressive government and force the International Criminal Court to either ignore it or act on it. And the whole world will be watching. This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast and check out some of our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. We'll see you next time.